Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Sip and Talkers. Whatever time zone you're tuning in from today, welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe.
I'm Sunny.
I have to tell you, I was scrolling through Xiaohongshu to catch up on the latest chatter.
Oh, yeah. What did you find?
Well, I saw this Chinese vlogger having an absolute spectacular meltdown online.
Really? A meltdown over what?
Okay, so he shot a travel vlog over in Taipei. And throughout the entire video, he kept intentionally calling it China's Taiwan.
Ah, right. I see where this is going.
Yeah, you know exactly where this is going. The next thing you know, he is literally being escorted out by immigration and hit with a 2-year entry ban. I mean, is this what they call the legendary one vlog ticket to a 2-year blacklist?
Well, that is an incredibly vivid way to put it, but yeah, that is precisely the administrative reality playing out at the border right now.
It's just wild to see it happen in real time on social media.
Right, but you have to realize you are not just looking at a social media stunt gone wrong. What you are watching is a high-speed, live-action collision of two completely incompatible legal and narrative engines.
Incompatible engines. I like that framing.
Exactly, because on one side of the strait, you have Taiwan operating under this legal framework of defensive democracy. And that framework, it relies on strict, codified legal boundaries to protect its civic institutions.
Right.
But then on the other side, you have the mainland operating under this rapidly expanding, omnipresent national security narrative. It is a system where political rhetoric is deeply, deeply tied to personal identity.
So when those two things meet?
Boom. When a tourist brings that mainland narrative into a jurisdiction governed by Taiwanese legal boundaries, they crash. And the result of that crash is the normalization of the administrative deportations you just saw on your feed.
That is a fascinating way to frame it. And honestly, it makes complete sense. We are going to tear into the mechanics of that collision today because we really need to figure out how a simple phrase turns a tourist visa into a deportation order.
Right. And we also need to unpack why the mainland's compatriot rhetoric completely disconnects from the legal realities on the ground in Taipei.
Exactly. But before we get hyper-focused on the immigration desk in Taiwan, we really need to pull the camera back.
Oh, absolutely. These localized border disputes, they don't just happen in a vacuum.
No, they don't. I mean, we are sitting here on April 10th, 2026, and the global tectonic plates are violently shifting. The pressure cooker at Taiwan's borders is really just a micro expression of the macro geopolitical tension we are seeing everywhere else.
I will set a quick baseline for us today because we are going to rely strictly on data. We want to examine why this sensory gap makes people across the strait feel like they live in parallel universes. So grab your coffee, keep an open mind, and, apply some independent critical thinking as we analyze the objective facts here.
Love that. Let's do a reality check on the globe first.
Yeah, the macro picture is moving at a breakneck pace today. If you want to understand the pressure on global supply chains and regional borders right now, you have to look at the life or death talks happening right this second in Islamabad.
Islamabad, yeah. The stakes there are just astronomical.
Totally. The dynamics there are redefining leverage. Just hours ago, a massive Iranian delegation touched down in Pakistan's capital.
And we are not talking about a handful of mid-level envoys trying to smooth over some trade tariffs, right?
Not at all. This delegation is led by Iran's parliament speaker, Kalibaf, and he brought the absolute top brass with him, their minister of defense, their top foreign affairs officials, and the head of their central bank.
Wow, so they are pulling out all the stops.
They absolutely are. And sitting across the table from them, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance.
Oh, it is heavy.
It is the highest level direct dialogue between these powers since the end of the Cold War. The tension is palpable.
It really is, especially when you factor in the rhetoric coming out of Washington. Literally, as he was walking to his motorcade this morning, Trump threw a massive wrench into those negotiations.
Yeah, he did. What was his exact phrasing again?
He told reporters point blank that the Strait of Hormuz will be open soon. And he didn't leave any room for ambiguity either. He said, with or without Iran's cooperation, we will get it done.
Right. He tied that directly to the ultimate red line.
Exactly. He reiterated that stopping Tehran from acquiring nuclear weapons is the non-negotiable priority.
So when you have the U.S. executive branch openly signaling a willingness to force open the world's most critical energy choke point militarily, if diplomatic talks fail, how does that level of brinkmanship force the hand of global markets?
Well, we are already seeing the numbers jump. The markets are reacting with absolute, unfiltered panic.
It is the fear of systemic energy strangulation. When you introduce definitive, uncompromising rhetoric regarding a choke point that handles a massive percentage of the world's daily oil consumption, the financial sector experiences a violent squeeze.
Yeah, let's look at the commodities data from this morning.
Yesterday, we saw a slight dip based on some false optimism about a preliminary agreement. But today, following those statements from Washington, we are seeing a massive retaliatory bounce.
I saw WTI crude oil futures surge back to $99 a barrel.
Yep, and Brent crude is hovering dangerously close to $96. The market isn't just pricing in a temporary disruption anymore. It is terrified of a long-term entrenched blockade.
So if those talks in Islamabad break down, the pricing models shift completely.
Exactly. They shift from temporary supply shock to a structural energy deficit.
Which means the pain trickles down to the consumer almost instantaneously.
Instantly.
You don't need a degree in macroeconomics to feel this. I mean, you feel it the second you pull up to the gas
I know
pump.
completely. Have you seen the U.S. inflation report for March that just dropped?
It is brutal. Gas prices alone are up 21.2%.
21%. That isn't just some abstract economic indicator. That is a massive regressive tax on the everyday commuter. It drains disposable income immediately.
Right, and consequently, we are seeing the consumer confidence index fall off an absolute cliff. I think it hit a 2-year low.
It did. It is the classic domino effect, but it is moving faster than historical models usually predict.
And that rapid acceleration is exactly what the International Monetary Fund highlighted in their April 8th warning, right?
Yes, the IMF is projecting global economic growth at roughly 3.3% for 2026, which, seems relatively stable on paper.
Sure, on paper.
But their primary concern, the threat they're sounding the loudest alarm over, is what they categorize as geopolitical energy inflation.
Because this isn't normal cycle inflation driven by consumer demand.
Exactly. This is supply-side shock driven by military posturing. The mechanics of a block strait are devastatingly simple and highly contagious.
Walk me through those mechanics. How contagious are we talking?
Well, when crude oil spikes, the cost of marine transportation and global freight spikes in tandem. That means the cost of manufacturing raw materials, shipping finished goods, and delivering those goods to your local grocery store inherently increases.
So the consumer absorbs the entirety of that geopolitical friction right at the checkout counter.
Right at the checkout counter.
And this grocery store analogy is playing out in a terrifying way across Asia right now.
Yeah.
Just look at the food security panic gripping India this week.
Oh, the fertilizer shortage?
Yeah. You have a massive agricultural sector that is entirely dependent on global supply chains. And right now, they are facing a severe shortage of nitrogen-based fertilizers.
Why? Because the production of those fertilizers is deeply tied to natural gas and energy exports out of the Middle East.
Which are currently bottlenecked by the Iranian standoff. It is staggering to think that a diplomatic deadlock over a narrow waterway thousands of miles away translates directly into an Indian farmer being unable to secure the chemicals needed to grow food.
To feed their local population, exactly. The hyperconnectivity of the global supply chain makes it incredibly fragile. It creates vulnerabilities in totally unexpected places.
And to round out this global scan, we are seeing rapid, unpredictable reversals in regional flashpoints everywhere.
Yeah, the Middle East is just a whirlwind right now. Israel's ambassador to the U.S. just confirmed that they have formally rejected a ceasefire proposal with Hezbollah.
But then, in the same breath, they did a massive diplomatic pivot.
Right. They agreed to formal peace talks with the Lebanese government set to start next Tuesday.
They are clearly trying to isolate non-state actors while engaging official state apparatuses.
That is exactly the strategy. Meanwhile, a bizarre and intense diplomatic war has erupted between Spain and Israel.
Yeah, Netanyahu lobbed heavy accusations at Madrid. It got so intense that the U.S. consulate actually issued protest warnings for American citizens in Barcelona today.
It is wild. And tucked beneath all of this noise, Zelensky is pushing a highly localized Ukraine-Russia ceasefire.
Which, surprisingly, seems to be gaining some initial traction in back-channel talks.
It really does. The entire geopolitical map is just glowing red with instability. Every major player is trying to leverage this moment of global distraction to redraw their own local boundaries.
And that brings us right back to the highly localized boundaries we started with Taiwan's immigration desks.
Let's dig into that.
I really want to dive deeply into this because the mechanism of how this works is fascinating. How does a single phrase on a travel vlog or a post on TikTok actually trigger a legal deportation? Let's break down the specific case studies, starting with the guy I saw on Xiaohongshu.
Okay, the April 2026 case involving the tourist surnamed Liang. This is the perfect baseline for understanding the administrative process.
Walk us through what happened.
So Liang applied for a standard sightseeing visa back in 2025. While he was traveling around Taiwan, he repeatedly utilized the phrase China's Taiwan in his social media broadcasts.
He knew exactly what he was doing.
Oh, absolutely. The Taiwanese immigration authorities flagged this behavior, they investigated the posts, and ultimately ruled that his speech constituted maliciously degrading the dignity of the Republic of China.
And the administrative consequence was immediate.
Instantaneous. His entry permit was fully revoked, and he was handed a 2-year entry ban.
I read he attempted to appeal the decision.
He did, but the executive yuan formally dismissed the appeal just this month. Interior Minister Lu Shifang issued a very clear public statement alongside the ruling. She explicitly noted that when foreign nationals step onto Taiwanese soil, they are legally bound to follow Taiwanese laws and engage strictly in activities compliant with their visa status.
And this isn't some isolated one-off event just to punish a loud vlogger. The precedent has been building for a while now.
It really has.
Look back at March 2025. There was a highly visible influencer who went by the handle Yaya in Taiwan.
Right. She was a mainland spouse living in Taiwan on a family residency permit.
Exactly. And she lost her residency status entirely. Why? Because she was actively advocating for military unification.
Basically calling for an armed invasion of Taiwan on her social media platform.
Right. And the official stance from the government was incredibly blunt. They stated, freedom of speech is not an excuse for armed unification.
The logic there is quite stark. If you are going to utilize the legal privilege of a family visa to reside in the country, you cannot actively campaign for the violent overthrow of that country's government.
Yeah, this seems like a pretty basic rule of entry.
It relies on the concept of national security overriding the privileges of residency for non-citizens. And it is crucial to understand that this legal framework is applied universally based on behavior.
It is not exclusively targeted based on Chinese citizenship.
Exactly. A prime example of this occurred in August 2025 in Ximending.
Ah, right. Those who don't know, Ximending is this massive, heavily trafficked shopping district in Taipei. Very busy.
Absolutely.
Well, 2 Japanese nationals were deported and blacklisted there. The reason? They were holding Chinese flags in the middle of the pedestrian area and publicly shouting political slogans.
But they were Japanese citizens.
Right. They had entered Taiwan on a visa-exempt tourist status. The immigration authorities determined that engaging in organized political propaganda fundamentally violated the purpose of entry under which they were permitted to cross the border.
Purpose of entry. That concept seems to be the absolute crux of the entire legal mechanism.
It really is the anchor for all of these administrative actions.
It is the exact same precedent we saw with Wang Ziyan back in January 2024. He was handed a massive 5-year ban.
Yeah, and a lot of the online discourse assumed he was banned purely because of his controversial, offensive comments on a late-night talk show regarding disabled individuals.
Right. People thought it was censorship of his jokes. But when you look at the actual legal hammer that fell, the ban was executed because he engaged in work. He appeared on a paid professional media program while holding a tourist visa. He violated the contract of his entry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what are the actual gears turning behind these administrative decisions? Like, what specific laws are the immigration desks citing when they stamp deported on these passports?
The framework is built on a few highly specific, overlapping statutes. The primary tool is the Act, governing relations between the people of the Taiwan area and the mainland area, specifically Article 15.
Article 15, what does that cover?
It strictly prohibits individuals from engaging in any activities that do not match their permitted purpose of entry. So, if you are granted a tourist visa, the law explicitly forbids you from engaging in paid public speeches, filming commercial media for profit, or participating in political campaigning.
It legally confines your behavior to tourism.
Precisely. Then you have the permit regulations for mainland residents, which contain specific clauses addressing speech or behavior that maliciously damages national dignity or belittles the sovereign status of the host government.
And then there's a broader catch-all, right?
Yeah. The broader Immigration Act serves as a catch-all. It grants authorities the power to revoke the entry or residency of any foreign national who is deemed a threat to national interests, public safety, public order, or good morals.
Okay, let me throw an analogy out there because I think a lot of people, especially those raised in Western democracies, get really tangled up in the freedom of speech aspect of this.
Yeah, that is a very common sticking point.
They hear deported for a social media post and immediately cry censorship.
Right.
But imagine you invite an acquaintance over to your house for a dinner party. They come inside, you pour them a drink, and suddenly they pull a can of spray paint out of their bag and write, "This house actually belongs to my brother," in giant letters across your living room wall.
That would be insane.
Right. If you immediately demand they leave your property, and you tell them they are banned from your house for the next 2 years, you are not violating their constitutional right to free speech.
No, of course not. You are enforcing basic house rules and private property boundaries.
Exactly. They entered your home as a guest, under the implicit agreement that they were there to socialize. Their purpose of entry was to hang out, not to vandalize your walls and publicly deny your ownership of the property.
That analogy cuts right through the noise. It highlights the difference between a fundamental right and a conditional privilege.
Because a visa is a privilege.
Yes. When a foreign national applies for a tourist visa, they are entering into a conditional legal agreement with a sovereign entity. They are granted a privilege to enter a different administrative jurisdiction.
And the host country has the absolute right to define the parameters of that privilege.
Exactly. When a visitor's actions pivot from sightseeing to political subversion or actively campaigning to erase the host's sovereignty, they have broken the contract. The state is not engaging in widespread censorship of its own citizens. It is utilizing administrative management to enforce the terms of a border crossing.
But the landscape is shifting. And this is where the conversation gets incredibly complex, because Taiwan isn't just utilizing these laws to protect sovereign titles from loud tourists anymore.
No, they are adapting to new threats.
It feels like they are rapidly expanding this legal minefield to shield their entire society from modern digital era threats. They are taking the concept of physical border defense and mapping it onto their digital borders.
And that evolution of legal boundaries is a direct response to new technological realities that didn't exist when the original immigration laws were drafted.
Give me an example.
Take digital violence. We have seen a global explosion in the malicious use of deepfakes and organized digital sexual harassment. Under Taiwan's Criminal Code 319.1, immigration authorities now have the power to directly revoke residency or ban entry for foreign nationals involved in these digital offenses.
So they utilize the violation of public order and good morals clause to draw a hard line in the sand.
Yes, they are stating that acceptable civic behavior extends into the digital realm, and foreign nationals who exploit Taiwanese citizens online will face physical border consequences.
And it goes far beyond personal digital conduct, doesn't it?
Oh, completely. They're actively legislating against hardcore state-sponsored infiltration.
Right, they passed the Anti-Infiltration Act, which is a highly controversial but fascinating piece of legislation designed specifically to sever the flow of foreign dark money intended to interfere with local elections.
It makes it a severe criminal offense to accept illicit funding or directives from hostile external forces to sway votes, lobby politicians, or disrupt public order.
They also lean heavily on the National Security Act, right?
Yeah, and furthermore, they are utilizing Article 63 of the Social Order Maintenance Act, which explicitly targets the spread of panic-inducing rumors.
So they are essentially building a high-tech legal fortress around their democratic institutions.
What you are describing is the practical application of a political theory known as defensive democracy.
Defensive democracy. I've heard that term used regarding post-WWII Germany.
Exactly. It gained significant traction in Germany to prevent the rise of totalitarianism through democratic means. The core thesis is that a tolerant, open society must legally arm itself against intolerant forces that seek to exploit democratic freedoms, like free speech, open elections, and porous borders in order to dismantle those very freedoms.
It addresses the classic paradox of tolerance.
Right. If a society infinitely tolerates those who are dedicated to destroying its liberty, that liberty will eventually be eradicated. Therefore, Taiwan enforces strict administrative management to protect its structural integrity.
Okay, I understand the theory, and historically it makes sense. But let me challenge the actual application of this on the ground today.
Please do.
Because when you look at laws governing panic-inducing rumors or speech that maliciously degrades dignity, the phrasing is incredibly subjective.
It is very broad.
How does a functioning democracy ensure that, while building these massive defensive walls and anti-infiltration acts, it doesn't accidentally hand the government the exact tools of censorship it is supposedly trying to fight.
That is the big question.
If a mid-level immigration officer or a ruling political party gets to unilaterally decide what constitutes a rumor, doesn't that immediately open the door to suppressing legitimate political dissent or uncomfortable journalism?
That is the most critical vulnerability in the entire system, and it is the central tension that scholars of defensive democracy constantly debate. The moment a state grants itself the power to police information under the guise of security, the risk of overreach is profound.
So what's the safeguard?
The only structural safeguard against that slippery slope is a fiercely independent judiciary and highly transparent, rigorously codified legal criteria.
The administrative branch can't just do whatever they want.
Right. They cannot simply deport a journalist or ban a critic just because they find their opinions politically inconvenient. They have to tie the action to a specific, demonstrable violation of the visa contract or a clear criminal statute, such as acting as an unregistered foreign agent or inciting imminent violence.
So the courts have to back it up.
The courts must act as a rapid, impartial check on the executive branch. However, your skepticism is entirely warranted. The system requires constant, aggressive vigilance by the voting public, the press, and civil society to ensure the state apparatus does not weaponize these defensive tools against its own democratic foundation.
And that tension is exactly why the reactions to these laws are so wildly divergent depending on where you sit.
The dissonance is huge.
Let's talk about the massive cognitive dissonance happening across the strait regarding these exact same events. Because while Taiwan's legal actions enforcing visa rules, tracking foreign funding, deporting agitators might follow a logical legal progression locally, they trigger absolute visceral outrage on the mainland.
It is fascinating to watch.
It really is. You have two massive populations looking at the exact same event, a tourist being escorted to the airport for a social media post, and they perceive it in entirely different parallel universes.
To understand that cognitive chasm objectively, we have to examine the dominant macro narratives operating within each society.
Okay, let's start with the mainland.
On the mainland, the educational apparatus and state media instill a very specific, deeply rooted historical worldview from a very young age. This worldview relies heavily on two interwoven pillars.
What's the first pillar?
First, there's a patriarchal narrative where the state is viewed not merely as a governing body, but as the unquestioned head of a grand national family.
So obedience is viewed as familial duty.
Exactly. Second, there is an intense victim narrative centered almost entirely on the century of humiliation. That is the historical period where foreign imperial powers exploited and divided a weakened China.
Right.
The overriding lesson drawn from this history is the absolute, unquestionable necessity of territorial unity at all costs.
So within that framework, any pushback from Taiwan isn't viewed as a complex legal dispute over jurisdiction or constitutional rights. It is viewed through a familial and historical lens.
Yes.
A Taiwanese official enforcing a border law is seen as a rebellious teenager acting out against the family patriarch. Or even worse, as a traitor siding with the foreign bullies to keep the nation divided.
It is inherently framed as a personal betrayal, not an administrative function.
Precisely.
And we must dig deeper into the underlying sociology that reinforces this reaction. In a system where local, individual political rights are structurally absent, where citizens cannot vote for their national leaders, form independent labor unions, or legally protest local government policies, sociologists often observe the development of compensatory psychology.
Compensatory psychology. Break that down for me.
Because the individual cannot exercise agency in their daily civic life, their personal self-esteem and sense of empowerment become intensely, almost entirely, tethered to macro-level concepts like territorial integrity, national rejuvenation, or military strength.
So they compensate for a lack of personal power by identifying with national power.
Exactly. So when Taiwan enforces its border laws against a mainland citizen, the mainland public doesn't process it as a mundane visa violation.
How do they process it?
They process it as an unjust silencing, a manifestation of green terror, and a direct, humiliating attack on their collective honor and compensatory identity.
That explains so much of the furious, hyper-nationalistic energy you see in the comment sections. When you lack power over your own local zoning board, you channel all your political energy into demanding control over an island hundreds of miles away.
You are trading individual civic agency for collective territorial pride.
But then look at the reality on the ground in Taiwan. The perspective couldn't be more fundamentally different.
No, it is a complete 180.
To the Taiwanese public, the term compatriot, which the mainland uses relentlessly in all its official messaging, has become completely weaponized. It isn't a term of endearment, it is genuinely repulsive to a massive segment of the population today.
The linguistic shift is fascinating. Why does a word historically meant to invoke warmth and shared kinship now trigger such a severe defensive reaction?
Because it is the geopolitical equivalent of calling someone your brother while openly holding a knife behind your back.
That is a harsh but accurate visual.
I mean, the rhetoric of we are family, blood is thicker than water, and shared destiny is almost entirely hollow because of what immediately follows it.
The military pressure.
Always. It is always accompanied by military fighter jets crossing the median line, economic sanctions targeting local farmers, and aggressive campaigns to poach Taiwan's remaining diplomatic allies.
It creates a terrifying dynamic.
It feels exactly like a toxic, abusive relationship, where the abuser uses the language of love and kinship as justification for aggressive control and isolation. You cannot look someone in the eye, call them your beloved compatriot, and simultaneously threaten to bomb their home if they refuse to submit to your authority. The hypocrisy completely destroys the term.
The demographic and polling data firmly supports exactly what you are describing. If we examine the long-term empirical data from the National Tsinghua University, the NCCU Election Study Center, it reveals a dramatic, multi-generational evolution in identity.
What are the numbers looking like today?
Today, over 60% of the population identifies strictly as Taiwanese.
Over 60%.
Yes. While the dual identity of Taiwanese and Chinese continues to shrink rapidly, and the strictly Chinese identity has practically vanished into the low single digits.
That is a massive shift.
It represents a profound structural shift away from a historical bloodline-based identity toward a modern lifestyle and civic identity. For the majority of the population, their identity is built on the daily reality of paying taxes to a local government in Taipei, utilizing a highly functional national healthcare system, and fiercely debating local policy during 4-year election cycles.
So the civic reality is their identity.
Exactly. The ethnic or bloodline connection to the mainland is viewed as distant academic history, while the civic reality of Taiwan is their immediate, tangible present.
So when these two completely contradictory mindsets collide, when the patriarchal historical narrative crashes into the modern civic reality, how do you even begin to bridge that gap?
Synthesizing this dissonance requires acknowledging the fundamental mismatch in how the two sides conceptualize time and governance.
Time and governance.
Yes. The mainland views the issue through a 5,000-year historical and cultural lens, demanding geographical unity based on ancient ties and past grievances. Taiwan views the issue through the pragmatic reality of present-day constitutional rights and immediate quality of life.
So it's ancient history versus present-day reality.
Right. True diplomatic respect. The only way to de-escalate the friction requires recognizing the other party as an independent, fully formed adult entity. A functioning, highly complex, democratically governed society of 23 million people cannot be treated as an inanimate object to be claimed or returned based on historical manifest destiny. Engagement must be based on their current lived civic reality.
And this profound disconnect isn't limited to history or politics. It bleeds heavily, and I mean heavily, into how the two sides view economics and infrastructure.
Oh, the economic disconnect is huge.
Have you seen the massive social media trends over the last few years where mainland netizens post these highly edited videos mocking Taiwan, calling it a rundown Tier 3 island?
Yes, I have analyzed those trends. It is a textbook example of a phenomenon we can categorize as the infrastructure illusion.
Infrastructure illusion.
It reveals a deep misunderstanding of how mature economies actually accumulate and store wealth.
Well, the videos are always structurally identical. They show shaky smartphone footage of Taipei's older, low-rise apartment buildings.
The ones with the faded exterior tiles and metal window cages.
Exactly, the narrow, cluttered alleys. And then there is an immediate, aggressive smash cut to a hyper-modern, glowing, neon-drenched skyscraper in a Chinese Tier 1 city like Shenzhen or Shanghai.
Right, to create a massive visual contrast.
And the voiceover conclusion is always some variation of, look how poor, stagnant, and backwards Taiwan is. They're stuck in the 1990s.
Let's completely dismantle this illusion because it is incredibly pervasive and completely misrepresents reality.
Let's do it.
The illusion stems from fundamentally misunderstanding two entirely different models of economic development. Over the past 3 decades, China has engaged in highly extroverted development.
Extroverted development, meaning visible to the outside.
Yes. It is a massive, state-driven, debt-fueled model focused heavily on rapid, highly visible infrastructure. Soaring glass skyscrapers, sprawling high-speed rail networks, and massive futuristic city centers. This model is designed, quite intentionally, to project national power and modernity visually to the world.
While Taiwan went a different route.
Taiwan, conversely, possesses what economic sociologists might call introverted wealth.
Introverted wealth. I love that framing. It is the stealth wealth of global geopolitics.
It is an apt description. Taiwan operates under very strict private property laws and experienced its major wave of rapid urbanization decades earlier than the mainland.
Which means they can't just build whatever they want, wherever they want.
Right. In Taiwan, a municipal government cannot simply bulldoze an older, dense city block to build a shiny new glass tower without engaging in years, sometimes decades, of incredibly complex, expensive legal negotiations with hundreds of individual private property owners.
Because of property rights.
Exactly. The legal friction prevents rapid visual modernization. The dynamic is actually very similar to older, incredibly wealthy European capitals like London, Rome, or Paris.
Oh, that is a great comparison.
You do not judge the immense generational wealth of Paris by the height or novelty of its newest skyscrapers. You judge its wealth by the massive capital flowing through its financial institutions and the accumulated assets held by its citizens.
So let's look at the actual ledger reality. Let's pull out the hard, verifiable data, because this is where the visual propaganda of the rundown island completely falls apart.
The data tells a very different story.
If we look at the IMF's 2025-2026 data, Taiwan's GDP per capita, adjusted for purchasing power parity, PPP, is consistently sitting over $70,000.
Over $70,000.
That doesn't just beat regional neighbors. That beats Japan. That beats South Korea. It rivals, and in some cases surpasses, major economies in Western Europe.
It is phenomenal purchasing power.
And when you adjust for the actual cost of living and the heavily subsidized national health care, the localized purchasing power is astronomical.
And we have to look beyond just annual income, too. The true measure of financial security is accumulated liquid assets.
Right, what you actually have in the bank.
The Allianz Global Wealth Report provides a highly illuminating metric here. Year after year, their analysis ranks Taiwan's net financial assets per capita, meaning cash, stocks, bonds, minus debt, in the top 5 globally.
Top 5 in the world.
Within Asia, Taiwan consistently ranks in the top 2, frequently battling Singapore for the absolute top spot. The sheer volume of liquid, investable wealth held by everyday Taiwanese households is, frankly, staggering on a global scale.
So where's all this money actually coming from? If they aren't relying on massive state-funded real estate projects or endless skyscraper construction, what is the underlying economic engine driving this massive accumulation of wealth?
The primary engine, widely recognized globally, is the Silicon Shield. Taiwan controls over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductor manufacturing capacity.
Companies like TSMC?
Yes. Companies like TSMC are not just successful businesses. They are the absolute, irreplaceable bedrock of the entire global digital economy. The massive GHPS and Science Act passed in the U.S. was almost entirely shaped by the terrifying realization of Washington's dependence on this single geographic node.
That is the primary engine,
Yeah.
But there's a secondary one, right?
Yes. The secondary and often overlooked engine of this wealth is Taiwan's incredible ecosystem of SMEs, small and medium enterprises. The island is populated by thousands of hidden champions.
Hidden champions.
These are mid-sized companies that quietly, ruthlessly dominate highly specialized niche global markets. We are talking about the manufacturing of high-end bicycle components, advanced functional textiles used by global athletic brands, and precision machinery components essential for global factory automation.
So they just own these tiny, crucial slivers of the supply chain.
They hold quiet monopolies on crucial supply chain nodes that the entire world relies upon.
And the wealth generated by those engines doesn't just sit in corporate accounts. It trickles down into a massive retail investment culture.
It really does.
It feels like almost everyone in Taiwan, from the taxi driver to the night market vendor, is heavily invested in the stock market. They are holding massive portfolios of global ETFs like VOO, constantly compounding their wealth through the U.S. market while living locally.
It's a very smart way to build wealth.
Let me give you an analogy for how I visualize this specific economic dynamic. Taiwan is like that older uncle you have who wears cheap flip-flops, cargo shorts, and a faded 10-year-old promotional T-shirt.
We all have an uncle like that.
Right. You look at him and assume he's struggling to pay rent. But then he casually walks out of a noodle shop and drives away in a Bentley to go check on the 5 commercial properties he owns downtown.
That is perfect.
The wealth is quietly sitting in the bank, compounding in global equities, and tied up in advanced manufacturing monopolies. It is not plastered on the exterior of his house or his clothes.
That analogy perfectly captures the disconnect between visual aesthetics and ledger reality, and it brings us directly to the core analytical flaw in the mainland's economic propaganda.
The statistical flaw.
To maintain the domestic illusion of overwhelming superiority, state media and influencers rely heavily on a statistical fallacy known as sampling bias.
Break down how they use it.
They will take the absolute wealthiest top 1% of a massive population, perhaps the top 20 million people residing in the hyper-modern financial districts of Tier 1 cities like Shanghai or Shenzhen, and compare their absolute newest infrastructure to the entirety of Taiwan's 23 million people, deliberately blending rural agricultural counties with older urban centers.
Which is completely intellectually dishonest.
Yeah.
You're taking the extreme upper echelon of a country with 1.4 billion people and comparing it to the entirety of an island. It is the definition of a skewed sample size.
It is entirely skewed, because the moment you conduct an actual apples-to-apples comparison, the narrative collapses.
Give me an apples-to-apples comparison.
If you compare a localized high-tech hub like Hsinchu in Taiwan to a high-tech hub like Shanghai, Hsinchu's median purchasing power, average household liquid assets, and influence over global market supply chains completely dominate. The rundown island narrative is carefully, systematically spun using selective visual cherry-picking. It ensures that mainland citizens, viewing the world strictly through the heavily curated lens of state media, never realize how exceptionally wealthy, globally integrated, and structurally stable Taiwan actually is.
Okay, so let's hide this massive economic data set directly back to the political reality we started with. Because when you combine the wealth metrics with the legal boundaries, it brings us to the ultimate, inevitable question at the center of this entire geopolitical conflict.
Which is?
If you strip away the historical emotion and look strictly at the data, why is it fundamentally logically offensive for a highly restrictive authoritarian system to demand ownership and absorption of a highly free, highly wealthy democratic system?
To answer that impartially, without injecting ideological bias, we simply need to look at the consensus of global indices. The 2025-2026 data paints a stark, mathematically undeniable picture of 2 vastly diverging civilizations.
Let's run through those numbers.
Let's look at the Human Freedom Index published by the Cato Institute, which measures personal, civil, and economic freedoms. Taiwan ranks 14th globally. China is ranked down in the 140s.
14th versus the 140s.
Now let's look at the Freedom in the World report compiled by Freedom House, which tracks political rights and civil liberties. Taiwan scores a 93 out of 100, placing it definitively in the free category. China scores a 9, placing it firmly in the not free category.
A 9. A 9 out of 100. That is a staggering numerical gap. And it continues across literally every metric of human flourishing, doesn't it?
It does.
If you look at the Press Freedom Index published by Reporters Without Borders, Taiwan is ranked number 1 in Asia. China is ranked in the 170s globally, near the absolute bottom.
And economic freedom.
Measured by the Heritage Foundation, Taiwan sits at number 5 globally. China is again ranked past 150. They are operating in completely different stratospheres of societal development.
So when we analyze this objectively, looking only at the structural realities and the mathematical indices, the demand for unification emanating from Beijing is essentially a demand for 23 million people to voluntarily downgrade their level of civilization.
Voluntarily downgrade? That is a chilling thought.
It means actively asking a population to surrender a 93-score lifestyle, a lifestyle characterized by high upward economic mobility, an entirely free and critical press, and completely secure, legally protected private property rights in order to submit to a 9-score system where those fundamental rights are structurally absent and subjugated to the state.
The resistance to this is not based merely on political stubbornness. It is based on rational self-preservation.
Completely rational.
And if we circle back to that weaponized compatriot narrative for just a second, if you genuinely view someone as compatriot, if you truly view them as family and you actually love them, your primary desire would be for them to maintain their wealth, their freedom, and their happiness.
That is what love is.
You would not want to drag your own family members into a poorer, vastly more restrictive environment simply to satisfy your own historical pride or fulfill a macro-nationalist narrative. You would want them to thrive exactly where they are. The actions, completely contradict the rhetoric.
That is the profound logical inconsistency at the very heart of the cross-strait friction. The empirical data shows a thriving, globally top-ranked, highly wealthy society. The external narrative demands their submission to a lower-ranked, highly restrictive system.
Which explains the pushback.
That is why the resistance in Taiwan is so systemic across all age demographics, and why the concept of political unification is met with such profound rejection. It is a rejection based not on ancient animosity, but on present-day civic reality.
You know, after dissecting all this heavy data, the geopolitical maneuvering in Islamabad, the intricacies of defensive democracy, and the wealth reports, it really brings me to a warm, reflective place about what this actually looks like on the ground.
It really is something to see in person.
When you walk through the streets in Taiwan, especially right around election season, you see something that looks chaotic but is genuinely beautiful. You see these Taiwanese elders sitting at plastic tables at local noodle stands or gathered in neighborhood parks, arguing passionately, loudly about politics.
Just letting it all out.
They are yelling, pointing fingers, debating intricate tax policies, openly and harshly criticizing the sitting president. And they do it because they know, deep down in their bones, that their vote actually dictates the future of their country. That chaos, that noise, that friction, that is the literal sound of freedom.
It is the sound of a system where the governing apparatus is forced to compete for its survival.
Exactly.
Taiwan's incredible economic prosperity, its top-tier global freedom rankings, its introverted wealth, none of that manifested by accident or through historical luck. It is the direct, undeniable structural result of a system that is constantly held accountable by its people.
Accountability is everything.
When political leaders know, with absolute certainty, that they can be peacefully voted out of office in 4 years, they are forced to build a society that benefits the citizens rather than merely enriching the state apparatus. The friction of democracy, the constant arguing at those noodle stands, is exactly what produces the diamond of national prosperity.
Absolutely. And I want to pause here for a moment. If you were listening to this right now from behind a firewall or sitting in an environment heavily restricted by state-controlled media, I want to say this. Our genuine, heartfelt wish is that one day you too will experience that friction.
I truly hope so.
We hope you will have the ultimate human right, the power of choice. The choice to access the open internet without a VPN. The choice to speak your mind and criticize a policy without the terrifying fear of disappearing, and the choice to step into a voting booth and elect your own local leaders.
Because true national strength isn't measured by the aggressive expansion of territory on a map or the height of a state-funded skyscraper. It is measured entirely by the amount of choice and agency given to the people living within those borders.
That is a powerful and completely data-supported conclusion to our analysis today. When you elevate the individual, the society naturally rises in the rankings. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us on Sip and Talk today. Remember to keep thinking critically, keep questioning the historical narratives you are fed, and always look at the objective facts and global ledgers independently.
Always look at the data.
And hey, if you love this conversation and want to keep exploring the world with us, make sure you hit subscribe to the Sip and Talk podcast. We love bringing these insights to you every week. Also, you absolutely must check out our good friend Mickey's YouTube channel. It's called Mickey to Life.
He is so funny.
He just dropped some incredible stand-up comedy-style vlogs documenting his recent European travels, fully infused with his signature, hilarious Taiwanese humor. You do not want to miss it.
Definitely go check that out.
We will see you next time. But before we go, I will leave you with this final thought to mull over. If a nation's visa is essentially just an invitation for a house guest, what does it say about the fragility of an aggressive political narrative when it views a single traveler's vocabulary as a lethal threat to its very foundation?